Todd Richards here, Roots, Hearts,
and Soul.
Stefan and I are launching this podcast based off cookbook Roots, Heart, and Soul by myself, Todd Richards, with a great help from Chef Stefan, the man, the myth, the legend himself.
Oh, you stop, you. We have such a beautiful history together.
I mean, it's crazy. Really, what people are going to get from this podcast is telling the story of Afro people, Afro cuisine.
We're going to be telling the story of the Pan-African diaspora.
Roots, heart, soul of the world, as we say. We are launching in a couple of weeks here, some terrific guests. Stay tuned. Follow us on all our social media at Chef Todd Richards in all formats. Chef Stefan, what's yours?
ChefStefan.it, AYITI. This is the correct way to say Haiti.
Well, we're getting education already.
So if you want to find out more, if you want to listen to great stories being told by amazing, amazing culinary talents, we're going to be hearing stories from Africa all the way to the Caribbean, all the way to the Americas. It's going to be something special.
Giving everyone the good rhythm, the good vibes.
Yeah, baby.
We look forward to seeing everyone. Talk soon.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. Since 2009, HRN podcasts have been exploring the wide world of food, beverage, and agriculture. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This is Gastronomica, a Heritage Radio Network podcast. I'm your host for today, Dan Bender. This series is produced in collaboration with Gastronomica, the Journal for Food Studies. This week, we offer another peek into Gastronomica's next summer 2024, coming soon. Elisa Paredes is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Michigan. And she joins us to talk about her research on banana ketchup, a celebrated condiment with a forgotten past. And her latest article, Banana Ketchup, Food Memory and Forgotten Labor Across the Filipino Homeland Diaspora Divide, is forthcoming in Gastronomica, issue 24.2. Elisa, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show. She joins us from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm in Toronto, Ontario.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks. And banana ketchup might just be the very best example for Heritage Radio Network's monthly theme of celebration. But perhaps behind that celebration, there's other narratives to recognize. And from reading your article, this is a remarkable key to understanding food in the Philippines and its diaspora. Let's start with the taste, shall we?
Let's do that.
So from the label moving to the very inside of the bottle, can you give us a tasting note?
Absolutely. Oh, this is so exciting. In fact, I prepared in advance for this podcast by bringing a couple of samples. So I have them out on the table in front of me here. Unfortunately, our listeners won't be able to see them. So I'll do the best job that I can just describing them for everyone who's joining us here today. And by listening in. So the first thing that I'll mention, of course, is that banana ketchup. So most I would venture to guess that most of the listeners, most of our listeners are probably more familiar with tomato ketchup. And tomato-based ketchup is really quite sour, actually. And the first smell that when you smell tomato-based ketchup, the first smell the first note that comes to mind, at least for me, is that it's kind of like a pickly kind of smell. It smells really pickly.
A whole lot of vinegar, right?
That's right. So it's pickly, it's vinegary, it's really quite sour. And when you take that first sort of taste of tomato ketchup, the taste goes directly kind of to the side of your tongue, right? It's that sour note that you first sense. And banana ketchup is really very different because it is really so sweet. Sweetness is the first note that comes to the fore, and it's strangely enough, I would say that it's not really banana. It's not really a note of banana that comes out for me, at least. And strangely enough, it's called banana ketchup, but banana is really just the third ingredient on the ingredients list, right after water and after sugar. So it's a sweet taste. It's a silky texture. It really is like, and this is how I describe it in the piece for Gastronomica, right? It is sort of for me at least, it like is a tropical. It has a kind of a tropical kind of note to it in which because it's so fruity. And it's interesting that you should mention celebration, because for me, at least, banana ketchup is the flavor of celebration, right? It's the flavor of like my nephew's first birthday party, right? It's the flavor of like a family gathering on a Sunday where we will inevitably have fried chicken and Filipino spaghetti, which is made with banana ketchup. So, I hope that everyone here listening today gets a chance to savor that themselves, savor banana ketchup themselves.
Alyssa, I see you have some bottles with us today.
Yes, I do.
And I wish I were in Ann Arbor to try it with you. But why don't you try your favorite brand there and tell us what it tastes like.
All right, here goes. All right, so I'm holding this bottle of banana ketchup. It is a Jufren brand, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, but it says Jufren banana sauce, and it's a very tall bottle with some like silky red liquid on the inside and a bright yellow label that I'm sure most Filipinos and members of the Filipino diaspora will immediately recognize. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this bottle. And
it's a very half consumed bottle. You've been using that.
This is a very well loved bottle indeed. There's actually only like a little bit of dregs at the very bottom that are left here. But yes, so this is a true testament to just how frequently I use this bottle, and in fact I use it so frequently that I always have a spare. So I have the second one with me.
There's two bottles with us.
Yes,
today.
There's
Excellent.
2 bottles. Just to make the point that I'm never without. Yes, I'm never without a bottle of ketchup. So here goes. I'm just going to pour some out here. All right, cool. And I'll go ahead and give it a little bit of a taste and share that experience with you all a little bit.
There's even a little smile on your face right there as you try it. Yeah,
it's so funny. I didn't even realize that I was doing that. But yeah, no, it is like, banana ketchup. It's so, and actually, maybe just for good measure, I'll have just a little bit of that, and also follow it up with a little bit of tomato ketchup, just for comparison.
Yeah, right? for comparison.
Right. So, gosh, it's crazy. Like just having tomato ketchup immediately after banana ketchup, I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so sour. Tomato ketchup is really very sour. It's really quite sour. Again, the notes that are coming to mind for me is it's vinegary, right? It's vinegary. I'm thinking of a beef hot dog. I'm thinking of a beef hot dog. I'm thinking of relish. I'm thinking of mayonnaise on like a bun, right? But banana ketchup, really, the taste is like, instead of going to the side of your tongue, right, it really just lingers at the very tip of it, right? Because it is really sweet. It's like candy-like sweet. And I mean, it feels so strange to kind of describe ketchup as fruity, but it really is. It really is really quite fruity, and I'm not really, I'm not sure that like bananas per se is like the first thing that comes to mind, right? But it's all other sweet fruits in general that to me is like the image that's like immediately coming to my head, right? And the smell of it is not really vinegary at all. It's really a lot more peppery. Yeah, I mean, the reason I smile is because I just take one little taste of of banana ketchup, and the first thing that I think about, of course, is my nephew's first birthday party or Jollibee.
Well, we're 500 kilometers apart right now, and I can tell from a distance which one you liked the most. Let me move on to the next question. So you said there's a whole lot it gets eaten with: spaghetti, fried chicken. Tell me some more things that this is. Is it dolloped on, poured on, dipped in?
It's all of the above. Yeah, so this is the reason why banana ketchup is such a standard sort of staple pantry item in a Filipino household, right? So, I like to, everyone in my family likes to have banana ketchup with fried chicken. So we'll dip fried chicken, we'll dip French fries, we'll dip a hot dog, in banana ketchup. But we also use it as an ingredient to for marinades, for instance. So we'll mix banana ketchup with soy sauce, with vinegar, with Worcestershire sauce to make a marinade for Filipino barbecue. So, we'll put that marinade on fried chicken, on slices of pork belly, just about anything that goes on a barbecue stick, we'll put that marinade on. But we'll also use it as an ingredient in various kinds, like for making, sauces and stews, for instance. So that's where spaghetti comes in.
But you don't make it yourself. You use it yourself, but you don't make it yourself.
That is precisely right. That's precisely right. And it's so funny that you should mention that, because I think, at a very basic level, banana ketchup is really quite easy to make. It's really just mashing up banana ketchup, adding a few spices, some vinegar, sugar, water, that kind of thing. But you're right. Filipino households always buy this. We always buy it. We don't make it ourselves. I've never heard a single person make it themselves at home. We always go to the Asian grocery store, the Filipino grocery store, and we buy Jufran banana ketchup that comes in a bottle.
Made in the Philippines itself, made its way halfway around the globe to Ann Arbor,
Precisely
Michigan.
Precisely right. And that's a source of.
Have you ever been tempted to try making it yourself?
It's I have. I'll say that, like, since writing this piece, I have wanted to. I have thought about doing that. I haven't gotten to it quite yet, mostly because I'm intimidated I'm intimidated by the idea that my banana ketchup is going to come out all brown, because that's kind of what happens when you mash bananas into most things, right? It comes out brown. And I've never cooked with like red dye before, but that's kind of I suspect that that's what's required to make it look the way that it's supposed to, as it does in the bottle.
And it's against that backdrop that I think the history unrolls, right? The fact that this is, as you put it, pantry item, and a ubiquitous pantry item. And before we get to why this is perhaps the most richly celebrated condiment on the globe, let's talk how it becomes that pantry item. And, you called out the fact that this is not just a banana sauce or banana condiment, but it's banana ketchup. There's a history behind that name, why the ketchup is always in there. The name, the word ketchup is in there. What's behind the name?
That's really, that's so interesting. I'm not sure. I don't really think I looked into that very closely for this particular piece, right? But there is a history. So there's a history that goes that is around this incredibly important figure of Maria Orosa, and I'm happy to. I'll say a lot more about her and her very, very interesting life story in just a minute. But banana ketchup started as a replacement for tomato ketchup in the middle of World War II. In the mid-century in the Philippines. So this was a time in Philippine history when the Philippines was under the American occupation. And during that time, sort of as part of the colonial experience, right? American officers who who established many of the government institutions that we know of today in the Philippines, that we still have today, sort of developed. Promulgated many ideas about what it meant, about what a healthy meal looked like, or what healthy food looked like, or what nutritious food ought to be. And as part of that, really kind of pushed for the importation of American foods, tomato ketchup included, right? Yeah.
So we've given the tantalizing name of Maria Rosa. Let's get back to her in just a moment. We're going to tantalize readers a little bit, but let's play a little imagination game and just imagine that you were going to school in the Philippines. You were a child, even before World War II. You probably would have heard a lot about food and nutrition. Can you take us through what some of those lessons might have been?
Right. So imagine yourself as like a little girl, maybe in the first grade, in the Philippines under American occupation. Right. You would have read textbooks. You would have read textbooks that included appropriate recipes, appropriate menus for what kinds of ingredients to use are appropriate or healthy to use, healthy to serve to your family. Right, and those would have included ingredients like cornflakes, ingredients like canned condensed milk, like bottled banana ketchup, right? And children from first grade all through high school. Under American occupied Philippines will have would have encountered these sort of ideologies, American ideologies, in the classroom, in the syllabus, like in the courses that they were asked to take in home economics, etc., about what kinds of things ought to be served.
And you can imagine how hard that would have been, right? Because it's not that you would have been told to eat healthier, right? Our kids hear that. My kid hears that at school all the time. But it isn't necessarily you're eating wrong at home or the food you're eating wrong, but that very much would have been part of the lesson from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, that would have been a part of it, right? The idea was what you are currently eating as a Filipino in the Philippines is unhealthy, it's unsanitary, it encourages disease, right? So these were the kinds of ideas that young Filipinos would have heard during this time. And in the classes that they took at universities, some of which were founded by Americans, they would have been told, look, actually, like instead of eating with your hands like Filipinos do, instead of preparing stews outside with wood-fired stoves, here's how you use an oven, or here's how you use. Here are appropriate canned and processed ingredients that are healthier for you, right? So the ask was very much to overturn the way you eat as a Filipino during this time.
And at this point, enter Maria Rosa, right? She's growing up in this time period, and she has a journey halfway around the world that introduces her to a lot of new foods, and in particular to canned foods, right? Tell us about Maria Rosa and eventually how she comes to be so interested in perhaps not just overturning what the lessons that she might have gotten as a youth, but introducing new foods along the way.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I love recounting Maria Rosa's story just because it is so much like a movie, right? It's so colorful. She lived such a colorful life. So Maria Ilagan Orosa was a woman who was born in the Philippines just at the turn of the 20th century. She was born in Batangas, the province of Batangas, and, was a very bright, very promising student who, because of her in sort of academic talent, was able to was sent to the United States to further her education as a pensionada, right, as a government-sponsored scholar. So she boarded on the ship, was on the ocean, the Trans-Pacific Ocean for ship for a few weeks or so, and eventually landed in Seattle in the state of Washington. And she was one of the earliest Filipino immigrants to the United States at this time. I mean, there would have been very, very few others like her. And certainly most of the other people who were immigrating to the United States at this time were male. And largely because the American demand was for male laborers, right? Folks who worked at the canneries, folks who worked on plantations, in the vineyards, in the grape vineyards, in the orchards of California, Washington, all across the Pacific Northwest. So she completed an advanced degree at the University of Washington. She was a woman of very modest means at the time, and she was a housekeeper for the dean of the school, who she boarded with. She worked at the canneries over the summer, and that's only the beginning of her story.
Now, we don't necessarily have her diaries or her letters home, but can you take an imaginative guess about what she might have been cooking for the dean as the housekeeper, and perhaps what she was cooking for herself?
Oh gosh,
We're writing the movie here is what we're doing.
Yeah. I love the question. I've never asked myself that. She does have a few letters that existed, most of which are in the possession of her family, but none of that mentions this. What I'll do is I'll just sort of conjecture here. I'll imagine based on things that other people will have written, other Filipino early immigrants.
Beautiful, fantastic, yeah.
Right, and they would have. There's a scholar, a historian by the name of Don Mabalon, the late Don Mabalon, who wrote about this. Who was a scholar, and who wrote about this and about how early Filipino immigrants would have used, adobo is a classic. It's a classic Filipino meal. It's like the sort of prototypical Filipino stew that's made largely with soy sauce and vinegar, and using chicken and pork. And she has all of these stories about how the folks, Filipinos who were working in the Alaskan canneries, used jackrabbit meat and all kinds of other sort of leftover meats that they were afforded by their employers to use in adobo. So I kind of imagine that Maria Rosa would have done something like that too, right? And, used the ingredients available in the Pacific Northwest to recreate the tastes of home while she was so far away from her family. And I don't know if she would have made something. I love the idea I love imagining what it would have been like to serve that to the dean of pharmacology, the dean who she was serving as housekeeper for, right? I almost wonder if, I don't know, that would have been, what a crazy experience that would have been, I suppose, for the dean.
And at some point, she makes her way from the canneries of Alaska back to the Philippines, where she starts working in food science. And yet along the way, she also gets involved in anti-colonialism. And after the Japanese invasion during World War II, she's also involved in resistance.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, she finishes her degree. She moves back to the Philippines. She takes up positions in important, like in the Bureau of Science. She's the expert now, right? And she's a respected woman scientist at this time. And then of course World War II breaks out. And then there are all kinds of issues, right? All kinds of issues around food shortages, around the incredible, again, like going back to what we talked about earlier, right? This was a time when food imports, American food imports would have been pushed on Filipino consumers in such a large extent, right? But But with the breaking out of the war, a lot of those imports became completely inaccessible, either because they were so expensive or just simply unavailable. Right? They were not. They were no longer really being sort of shipped into the Philippines. Right? So there's food shortages all around. Um, Folks in Manila, especially, there's a breakout of beriberi. This is a disease that's caused by thiamine deficiency when you don't have a diverse diet. This is a disease that happens, and so she's in these important government posts, and she wants to do something about that, right? She wants to do something about the issues that she's confronted with, and what she does is she comes up with some 700 or so different recipes of that. Sort of use that replace imported items, imported goods with Filipino with local ingredients, and that very much becomes a part of her sort of her political project, if you will, with her ideology. Right, she becomes this sort of figure of food sovereignty. And a critic, in a way, a critic of the sort of colonial enforced dependence on American imports, and she uses her posts to find ways to kind of remedy that.
But is she also involved in in resistance movements?
Yes, precisely. Yeah, she is. And this is a sort of not so secret about Maria Rosa, and one of the really cool elements of her, or parts of her life story, right? So in the daytime, she's working as a government bureaucrat, but at night she becomes this like guerrilla fighter, if you will, right? She becomes this like sort of not so secret player in the resistance movement against the Japanese. And she has this like secret code name, Ready, Willing, and Able. And from her family members, the folks who I interviewed to write this piece, right? They have like all of these like stories just passed down from generation to generation about how Maria Rosa secretly transported food to prisoners of war, who were kept in the University of Santo Tomas, which was converted into a strange, like, sort of prison at the time, right? And she would like sneak in canned goods and cookies and all of these things that she made with local ingredients into those prisoner of war camps. Through all kinds of secretive means, which I think is just totally just awesome.
And one of the things that I hear you saying really is that yes, she had a secret life and a public life, but really there was a continuity between the two. It wasn't that she, in some kind of superhero disguise, became the nighttime revolutionary. She was a revolutionary food scientist.
That's right. I think that's so well put. Like, really, the project was exactly the same, right? It's just like, it really was like, there is a continuity. She's going about them in different modes, right? Through her formal government posts, and a kind of informal sort of role that she's taken on as a resistance fighter. But really, the political project is the same, right? It is food sovereignty. It's freedom from dependence on imported goods.
And you note in your work that she never patented the recipe for banana ketchup. The family didn't get rich off of it. She didn't get rich off of it. Now, she dies towards the end of the war. And it might be that those documents might have been lost in the final days of the war, in the battle for Manila. And so let's play another imagination game. Do you think she ever wanted to make money off of banana ketchup? Did she want to? Plenty of people have gotten rich, and we'll talk about that. Do you think she meant banana ketchup for the nation, for the diaspora?
I've asked this exact question myself, of her family members, right? many of whom like could have been, they could have been the corporate Heinz family of the Philippines if this recipe was patented. And every single time I asked that question to multiple of her family members, the answer was the same, which was she never wanted to patent this recipe. That was not the idea. The idea was not to was not to come up with the next commercial success, right? It was always to find ways to remedy import dependence, and to produce quote unquote science for the people, right? Science that was freely accessible to anybody. And she in addition to the work that she did in the Bureau of Science, she distributed a lot of this information, her inventions, her new recipes, through sort of extension services, that connected the government to her, to the multiple provinces of the Philippines. So no, I don't think that was ever really part of the idea.
We talked about the celebration of banana ketchup as a symbol of anti-colonialism, resistance, and food sovereignty. And she rightly has, without the movie that you clearly should be making, she has been celebrated. And can you give us an example of how she's been celebrated?
Yes. I mean, so before a little disclaimer before I talk, I describe a little bit more about that, right? For many years, she was sort of like almost a forgotten figure, right? Almost a forgotten figure in Filipino history and in Filipino American memory. And it's really only very recently, actually, that Filipinos and Filipino Americans and other members of the diaspora have kind of rediscovered her through the work of her family, right? So let me give you just a little bit of an example of this, right? You can find stickers. You can find stickers of Maria Rosa. You can buy posters of her face. You can buy posters of her holding like a bottle of banana ketchup as a member of here in the United States, right? If you're like me and you follow a number of like Filipino American owned businesses on Instagram, you'll know that a lot of them have actually, a lot of them will use the face of Maria Rosa on T-shirts, on tote bags, on stickers, like I mentioned, as kind of a symbol of like Filipino and Filipino American identity and pride, right? There are a number of Filipino American and Filipino Canadian owned restaurants who that use banana ketchup in the cooking that they do. Some of them will have it on the table. Some of them will use it to prepare marinades, like I mentioned earlier, right? I mean, there's so many different ways that members of the diaspora have kind of learned about her story and talked about it. So, for instance, there's a very celebrated restaurant called Archipelago in Seattle, and the owners of this restaurant, since, if I'm not mistaken, right, since the very beginning, since they opened this restaurant, have retold Maria Rosa's story as part of in the process of serving their guests their meals, right? And that's kind of become a part of their performance of their identity, and also the kind of like educational project of this restaurant to kind of educate new Americans new Americans about this very, very cool part of their history.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. And here in Toronto, where there is a large diasporic population, I can drive out from my house and find in a dozen different stores a short drive away thousands of bottles of banana ketchup for sale. And not a single one is made by a Western multinational food company. Something to celebrate? Or is there another story we should be paying attention to?
I feel that when I moved to the United States, especially, I live and work now at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in Michigan. one of the first things that I was most anxious about was just like, is there going to be an Asian grocery store nearby? And is there going to be a way for me to buy banana ketchup so that I can have it in my house? And you're right. Most of the banana ketchup, all of the banana ketchup that's sold in grocery stores is by a single company. It's not there's no version of banana ketchup that you can find that's made by that's made by Heinz Corporation, right? All of it is made by a single company, and they are called NutriAsia. And NutriAsia is sort of the outgrowth of the first person who patented banana ketchup after Maria Rosa. His name is Magdalo V. Francisco. Magdalo V. Francisco patented the first recipe of banana ketchup and established a company after his own name. So Magdalo Francisco, the company is called Mafran, after Magdalo Francisco. And after a bunch of twists and turns and all kinds of controversies within the company itself, eventually came to sell Mafran to NutriAsia, NutriAsia Corporation, which is this company that is owned by magnates in the pharmaceutical and food and beverage industry.
So despite all that, it does become transnational.
Yes, it does.
And then at the beginning of this century, the story of banana ketchup takes a violent turn.
That's right. Yes, that's right. So imagine now, all of the banana ketchup that's ending up in Toronto where you are, in Ann Arbor where I am. All of that comes from these two manufacturing plants on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, right? Just, a few hours outside of Manila. And sometime not too long ago, just less than 5 years ago, right? A kind of violent union busting kind of event happens at these banana ketchup manufacturing plants of NutriAsia, right? The issue is that is around. So the controversy is around an issue called ENDO, which is short for end of contract, right? So one practice that is very common in the food manufacturing industry, and certainly in a lot of other manufacturing industries in the Philippines, is the hiring of short-term laborers and the firing of them and then the rehiring of them again, right? So it's this reliance on a perpetually precarious workforce that is deregularized. And the reason that NutriAsia and other companies do that is to skirt their responsibilities over the provision of benefits, because benefits are due to regularized employees. And when you are not a regular employee, then you aren't entitled to any of those benefits, right? So the Department of Labor orders NutriAsia to regularize their employees. There's a lot of back and forth and controversy about who exactly is responsible. Who is it? Like which institution, which organization exactly is responsible for the regularization? And so there is a mass demonstration by the folks who would have, the folks who were working at the bottling plant, and that demonstration is violently dispersed by the police. And this is, this was news that came out and circulated a little bit in the Philippines and in the Philippines and in sort of progressive organizations, but it is a very little known history, a very little known story outside of those networks. And I would venture to say very little known to those in the diaspora.
We talked before about Maria Rosa and food science's revolution, and I want to give you something to muse on and imagine with it, if I may. A tough question, but can we use this diasporic love for banana ketchup? Can we use that for labor rights?
I think we can. And in fact, more than that, I think we should, right? Part of the reason why I came to write this piece in the way that I did it, the reason why I took this particular approach to writing this piece, right? Juxtaposing the story of Maria Rosa, how it came to represent kind of food resistance, decoloniality, food sovereignty, juxtaposing that with the story of this violent dispersal of a strike in the manufacturing plants, is because I think that is a connection that isn't really made as often as I think it could be, right? Speaking now as like myself, a Filipino in the diaspora, I'm sure that many other listeners who are perhaps Filipino or Filipino American, Filipino Canadian themselves, or other members of a diaspora broader than that will probably agree with me when I say that, like, in my family, we love food. We love food. We cherish food. It becomes our way of connecting to the homeland, in real or imagined ways, right? We have this enduring sort of fondness for food as a kind of marker of who we are as a people, right? But for me, and again, going back to the reason why I wrote this piece, was because that love, that attachment to food really sits uncomfortably with the other fact that, like, food is also at the center of so many controversies, so many controversies back at home, right? Especially around the production and the manufacturing of those same foods that we consider to be markers of who we are. And I think that, the story of banana ketchup is just the perfect way to, like, argue that these things are not different, actually, that in the same way that these two stories are not that different from each other. In the same way that Maria Rosa would have used banana ketchup for resistance, in the same way that Filipino Americans recognize banana ketchup as a symbol of upholding that identity and defending that identity in the face of in their new context, in their new cultural diasporic context. We can say that, like, what's happening in the manufacturing plant is also very much a defense of decoloniality, because end of contract, the corporate practice of endo is itself a manifestation of the legacy of colonialism.
So, in other words, using Maria Rosa and that fascinating, crucial story, we can begin to peel back the label, maybe reclaim the bottle for the nation, for the diaspora, for the very people who made it, challenging perhaps in if not legal ways, at least in political ways, its patent, its history as rewriting the history of the pantry item itself.
That's very well said. Right? And let us also not forget, right, that the very reason, like, the same sorts of labor, the same labor struggle, the same precariousness of work in the Philippine homeland, but those are the same issues that will have compelled people to move out into the diaspora in the first place, right? So many of us who end up in the diaspora come from families who will have struggled with that, known the working class struggle in the Philippine homeland, right? And so, yeah, let's not forget that. Let's remember, actually, that their struggle is ours as well, and it is connected through this very important food item.
So I will leave listeners to read and to shop and to taste banana ketchup. Thank you, Alyssa. Listeners will find the full piece in the next issue of Gastronomica, the Journal for Food Studies, issue 24.2, coming soon. For more details, visit gastronomica.org. The Gastronomica podcast will return with new episodes next season. Subscribe to our podcast feed on your favorite platform to stay updated.
This show is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.